Hey everybody, today I'm going to be reviewing In the Heights. This film is directed by John Cho. This film is adapted from the original Tony Award-winning musical that was written by the very prolific Lin-Manuel Miranda, who of course went on to create and star in Hamilton on Broadway. Maybe you've heard of it. I have been aware of In the Heights since about 2008, 2009 when it really started to gain some critical acclaim in the Broadway world, and I did see the show eventually, and I really liked it. I felt like it had something very fresh and fun and new about it, and it was unique, with a lot of that hip-hop, rap, Latin flavors to the music. And it had a lot of the flavors of somebody who lived a life like that, who grew up in that type of world. Somebody who has that passion for the arts. You can feel that passion, whether you like Lin-Manuel Miranda or not. You can feel that passion from him inherently through the story. And really, you just feel it in every moment. I think it's one of those musicals that almost anybody can enjoy on a basic level. It's very accessible. It's not West Side Story or anything like that, but you can certainly draw comparisons to that, particularly aesthetically. But I always appreciated how it captured a lot of that vibrance and energy of the older musicals, but kind of, updating it for a modern era. And of course, Hamilton came out and it became just the biggest smash hit ever, and all of a sudden Lin-Manuel was a household name. And I always figured he would go on and do great things. I never expected him to skyrocket to that degree. But for me, I have to say, there is something to the musical style of this particular one in the heart of it that I tend to gravitate more to just on an emotional level. I think In the Heights is actually quite an underrated musical by comparison, obviously, to Hamilton, but it's also a very cinematic one. Years ago, watching the show, I just knew, this is going to be a movie. I mean, it has to be. It has that cinematic quality or the potential to become very cinematic. And in the right hands, I thought it could be really good, and here we are. So the adaptation is finally here years later, and my response to it is that it's solid. It's good. It does its job on a basic level. It moves very well. It's paced well. It has a lot of energy to it. And yet for me, as somebody who is perhaps a jaded, cynical human being, it just never really came alive for me. The flavor, the spice, the textures of that original show, just the beating heart of it felt a bit watered down and kind of fell a little flat. And people might think, what do you mean it doesn't have the flavors of the show? They call attention to it constantly. They capture the vernacular, they capture kind of, the food and the mention of condensed milk and the snow cones, the mom and pop stores, the blackouts, the poverty, all of those things. And yeah, it is there, but yet it somehow never really popped for me. It reminds me less of a musical that has its own unique thing, its own unique voice, and it felt more like an ad that would have been shot for like a Coca-Cola commercial that they used for maybe like the Super Bowl or a Pepsi ad. With all the young 20-somethings pretending to be teens in their rompers and their booty shorts. It felt more like a generic representation of a culture and a world that is anything but generic. But I just think we have a director here who isn't particularly creative in the ways that I think that this film really needs, or maybe the story and the idea of it really deserves. The cinematography certainly moves. It does capture your attention. It has a lot of quick cuts and a lot of, expected editing tricks that we do see a lot in movies like this, but it felt very expected, like I just said. It felt kind of very surfacey. No real interesting shots of note, or no real interesting sequences that I thought, wow, the way this is edited really has an emotional impact on me. And also just as a glaring thing, and I have this problem a lot, and I complain about it a lot when I watch modern musicals, but we never really feel the physicality and the presence of the performers, of the dancers. The shapes of the body and how you're telling a story with it, how you're communicating through that physicality is so integral to, performing like this, to musicals. Here, as an example, I felt like, a lot of the spaces felt very limited. And, as I like to say, a lot of times when you're doing a lot of editing and cutting, you feel removed from the actual physicality of what's going on. And therefore, it kind of just flattens the experience and it keeps me disconnected from it. A lot of the time I felt the music and the rhythm, but yet I myself don't feel like I want to get up and dance. And I feel like I should feel like I want to get up and dance from this. The two genres that I think are some of the hardest in the world to do well for directors are comedies and musicals. Tonally, in particular for comedy, is a really hard thing to pull off. But I think a lot of just the spectacle for musicals and how to capture that tone, how to capture everything being on the edge of abstraction, being, heading towards fantasy, how to make that work and be convincing. They need to do so many things: build the story, build musically, capture the physicality of movement. There's usually a lot of other things going on in the sequence at the same time, making the transition between conversation to song somehow effortless. Again, everything being right on the edge of abstraction is, I think, the point of musicals. And I think, in this more kind of cynical age, we're more afraid of the fantasy aspects of it. But to me, that's the heart of it. That is where a lot of the poetry comes from. La La Land, as an example, did an excellent job with that aesthetically. I do have my issues with that a particular musical, but I think it captured the feeling and the style, and there's real technique behind that. It was treated with a special kind of artistic flair and a knowledge of musicals, absolutely, capturing that exaggeration of reality. And I know that this director does have experience. He did direct a couple step-up movies, I believe, and there are shades of Busby Berkeley in this particular musical, and of course, as I've mentioned, certainly West Side Story. Yet, I'm just not feeling the grit. I'm not feeling like I'm a part of it the way that I want to. Like the dancers here are moving a lot. There's a lot of choreography. You can see the grit on their faces, and yet sometimes it almost feels too vigorous, and it's too much going on to the point where you can't connect to it. Believe it or not, I think even in choreography, sometimes the most simple movement can be very, very effective. Less is more, I think. I always appreciated how people like Busby Berkeley, Fred Astaire, Gene Kelly, Vincent Minnelli, Bob Fosse, getting into a little bit later, they had such versatility within the musical genre in the sense that they could do these spectacular sequences with tons of dancers, lights, and, all this different stuff, and a lot of very technical, difficult dancing, and yet they could strip it all back when they needed to and do the most simple of gestures, the simplest of dance steps, and make it so moving. Something that anyone can do, and somehow it's more effective than a giant number. Look at the number for Singing in the Rain. It's just a guy dancing in the rain. One of the simplest dances Gene Kelly probably ever did, and yet look how famous it is. A little soft shoe, a flirty number with just basic box steps can do wonders. I do love musical numbers where you just have like a singular focal point, some sort of prop, some sort of, artistic gimmick that the piece revolves around. And that really does have an effect on an audience. I think of the giant veil, that's like blowing in the wind in Singing in the Rain as an example, or even just, like the rotating room where Fred Astaire is dancing on the ceiling and everything in Royal Wedding. There is kind of an example of that here. You do see a number that is similar to that, where you have two people kind of dancing on the sides of a wall. But it just didn't have that same build, that same attention to detail, and that same ability to be able to kind of respect the dancer's movement. Already in the show, I would say that one of the flaws is that a lot of the musical numbers do run together, and they need something to kind of distinguish them a little bit more. And part of that is stylistically intentional, because you do want to casually be able to slip into, from talking into going into rap. It is more of a conversational thing, yet this still has the spirit of and the pizzazz of a lot of those big, sparkly MGM musicals that we had from the past. And the big numbers here, the ones that are, major set pieces that I really was connected to and found really climactic and interesting on stage, maybe fell flat for me. And numbers that maybe I was less a fan of or were less memorable in the show actually work here. So it's kind of ironic. One of the numbers I think actually does work very well for the screen here is the Claudia's final number. I think just aesthetically, it's a lot more interesting than the rest, and I think it's pretty much the only one that isn't afraid to really cross over into that fantasy world of the musical. It finds the poetry in the music and brings it out, and brings out a lot of the color and all of that. And it is really visually satisfying. And it had more of an arc and a mood. And yes, it's an emotional focal point for the story. So it needs to be, I think, very, very strong viscerally. I mean, it wasn't brilliant. I do still think that, I'm not a fan of the way that they photograph the performers, the dancers, but it worked pretty well. This might seem strange, maybe not, but years ago when I was watching this movie, watching the musical on stage, I was thinking to myself, what kind of directors would be good for this? And weirdly, the name Spike Lee popped into my head. I'm not saying I don't think he should direct this film, but I do think that he has an understanding of material like this. And he has a way of shooting New York City in a way that is very creative and very interesting when he's good. He misses a lot for me, but when he's very strong, some of his editing, some of his montages, of course, I think are some of the most creative. He knows how to make a movie feel completely musical, even if it's not a musical at all. I look at something like Do the Right Thing, and that, just the feel of New York City and just like the hip hop flavor, everything, it's in the blood of that movie. The authenticity, the way the camera works with the editing, the way it works with the viscera of the film, how you hear you know, like music coming from windows and boom boxes, and it kind of carries you through in this way that is just so unique. All the pieces work together and feel like one. You know, it engages and it breaks the rules. There's a risk about it, and it feels fully formed. I've been to New York City many times, and that felt like the real New York City. It felt like the parts of New York City that a lot of people may not see very often. And with this one, New York City felt more like an Apple commercial. Again, surface level authenticity, a certain respect for the material, but then when you sink your teeth in a little bit too far, I think it feels a little shallow. I think the cast here is actually pretty good, and I usually groan when I think of when they're going to cast a movie musical compared to a Broadway one, but this one, I think they got some really talented performers, very good singers, very good dancers. I really like the lead a lot. He has a real positivity and energy about him, and also just a boyishness. Jimmy Smits is great. There's a Mark Antony sort of cameo in this, and it's actually really powerful. I think it's one of the most powerful scenes in the movie, or most powerful performances in the movie, even if it's very, very short. The whole Nina and Benny storyline I didn't care for as much in the film. I think it carries through more in the show, whereas here it sort of fizzled a little bit. But I like the girl who plays Nina. She is really lovely, and she has a strong presence about her. At first, I thought she might be a better choice to play Vanessa, just because, you know, I picture Vanessa as having a hardness about her, a hardness in the features, which I think that she has. And I always pictured Vanessa to be more like a Chita Rivera, as they make fun of in this movie, a Rito Moreno. That fiery energy, somebody that is very young but has had to grow up really quickly, so there is just naturally a hardness to her. Karen Olivo played her on Broadway, and I thought that was an excellent choice, and she obviously also played Anita and won a Tony for it, so it makes sense there. But the girl who plays Vanessa in the movie, at first she wasn't clicking for me. I didn't care for her. It wasn't necessarily her fault. I think she did a very good job, and she's a good actress, a good performer. Just her demeanor and something about the charisma I always picture from Vanessa didn't quite feel right at first, but then as the movie went on, you know, I started to buy into her, and I started to really like her. I feel like her allure comes more in the subtlety of her sass, and she is somebody that is very charming. There is a sense of urgency in this movie compared to the show. Naturally, you want to raise the stakes more typically for a cinematic experience and tighten certain elements here. Some work out, others don't. It does become much more pointedly political, I think, in the ways that Hollywood loves to do. And it just doesn't feel that necessary. I feel like the show already captures a lot of that conflict already within it, and there's no need to really like hammer that message home anymore. I prefer when things are less propaganda and there are more themes that are woven into the script and make you think about them more. But that's just me. So yeah, obviously I have my opinions on it, and I know that people probably think I really don't like this. I do on a basic level. I am recommending it because I think it is a solid B effort. Just personally, I feel like it had a lot more heart to give than that. And it is just one of those things where I have a natural bias. It makes me very, very sad that musicals are just not handled with the same kind of craft and attention to detail that they were in the past, where these cinematic translations could be fully realized. I'm telling you, I know a lot of people just hear the name, you know, hear the genre musical and they cringe, but it's like, no, these were extraordinary cinematic experiences that any cinephile should see. And for whatever reason, we just rarely find a director, I think, that both has the interest in the genre and the ability to bring it to life. On occasion it happens, but it's just more rare than I would like. And that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm gonna go ahead and plug my website. It is deepfocuslens.com. I'm an artist and I do commission portraits and I sell prints of my work. If you're interested, you can always go to the website. If you have a question about a commission or an art piece, you can certainly email me. My email is in the description box below. And here are my Patreon supporters. Thank you so much for everything. If you are interested in becoming a patron, the link to support that is below, as well as my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.